Hello. Back in 2012, we had a program that was so interesting. We're going to recall it for you. The book that was presented at that time by Tom Horn, and by the way, Cris Putnam was with us. The Final Pope is here. Petrus Romanus. Very interesting topic. Started a lot of conversations. I hope you enjoy the following program. Well, today I'd like to welcome author, lecturer, all-around good fellow and gentleman, Tom Horn. Welcome. You've been here before. Always good having you here.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Great to be with you.
And on my left, we have Cris Putnam, who is I'm given to understand, a natural-born researcher. You love to dig for facts. And in this book, Petrus Romanus, Tom and Cris have, in fact, dug out things that have been hidden literally for centuries. You're going to hear about them today. You're going to hear about what I believe was divine guidance that put this book together. And Tom, we've talked about this. Perhaps the biggest story about Petrus Romanus is not just the timeliness of it, but the way it came together in the first place.
Absolutely right. And I mean, we can't go into all of the details, but Gary, it is not hype for me to say that in my lifetime, and keep in mind, I pastored 25 years, 30-some years in ministry, and not one thing in my lifetime has even come close to being as important as this research. The way it came together, the stuff that fell in our lap, and I got to tell you that Cris Putnam, who's with us here today, and I'm thankful because he's the theologian and the apologist that keeps me straight. There were more than one incident during this book in which we literally stopped, questioned whether we even should write it or not.
Wow.
Because the material was both not only important, but it literally made the hair stand up on the back of our neck.
In other words, there was some divine guidance involved here. And by the way, that's when the best things happen in Christian publishing. Over the years, there have been a number of Christian authors who have had this testimony that they felt the guiding hand of the Lord as they put their work together. And I think you did too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, even the way Cris and I came together is another story we won't take time to tell, but it was unexpected. Emails from him to me at the same day that I had been talking to others, wondering why nobody had written a book on the prophecy of the popes. I mean, here you have a medieval prophecy, right? 900 years old. It's one of the most important Catholic documents, probably. It was concealed inside, the dark corridors of the Vatican for 500 years, was only brought to light in 1595. But now there seems to be something preternatural that is occurring. There's something strange, something supernatural, because not only did the author of the Prophecy of the Popes look forward to what appears to be the year 2012, we started discovering that way beyond the Maya, there were preachers, experts, theologians, and occult societies, prophets, looking for hundreds of years and in some cases thousands of years into the future, seeing an event horizon in which the false prophet of end times biblical fame would appear just before the coming of the Antichrist and looking to the year 2012.
Wow. And of course, who hasn't heard about the 2012 prophecies? But this has nothing to do with the Mayan calendar, folks. This is something entirely above and beyond that, I believe. And that brings me to Cris. And Cris, welcome.
Hi, Gary. It's an honor to be here.
Cris Putnam is I think, a born researcher, and I've talked with him enough to know that. There are some people who just love to pursue the little dark corners of literature. And you were actually brought into this because of the prophecy of the popes and a lost book. Tell us about the lost book.
Oh, that's correct. When I started researching this prophecy, I began to read other books that had been written about it. And there was a pretty popular one that was written around the year 2000 called The Last Pope by John Hogue. And I read his book, and I was trying to find out the true origins of the prophecy, because there's some controversy about if it was really from Malachi, if it was really from 1139, and some scholars will say that it's a forgery written around in the 16th century. But John Hogue mentioned an Italian book that had burned up in a monastery, and perhaps it had the last real information about the origins of the Malachi prophecy. So I started looking around for the title of that book, and lo and behold, if I didn't find the book that was supposed to be lost to history, and I was able to locate a library that had it and got some scans of it sent to me. So that was the beginning of just some really amazing discoveries, that things were just falling into our laps as we researched this prophecy.
Now, the prophecy of the popes is what? For people who are not familiar with it, give us a thumbnail of what that prophecy says.
Well, certainly. As the legend goes, an Irish saint named Saint Malachi was summoned to Rome to visit with the Pope, and while he was there, he received a vision of 112 popes from the future, the next pope from then on to the end of time. And so in this vision, he has these Latin phrases, these nebulous little phrases, and some of them are kind of vague and some of them are pretty specific. But each phrase denotes something about the pontificate or the reign of the particular pope in which it denotes. So you have ones like the Roman cross, or flower from flowers, or some of them are more specific. And for instance, religion depopulated. That was the one that really caught my attention, because here we have one that's in recent history, and it was for Benedict XV, which was 1914 to 1922. Now, when I'm looking at this prophecy, I was skeptical at first, and I didn't know whether I should accept this as a real prophecy. It's not a biblical prophecy. It's some kind of mystical Catholic thing. Why should I believe it, right? Well, Benedict XV, 1914 to 1922, religion depopulated. This was the time of World War I, where the Catholic Church lost a lot of members just from casualties in the war. But to add insult to injury, it's the time of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, where they estimate like up to 200 million of the Orthodox Church left the fold to join communism. And then you have Stalin and Lenin persecuting and throwing people in the gulags. I mean, I think Stalin alone is responsible for 42 million deaths. So you have the greatest mega murderer in history right at the time that this prophecy said religion would be depopulated. And that's the kind of evidence that's so compelling that I had to take this thing somewhat seriously and look into it further.
So you began to see little clues here and there, and your eyes got wider and wider, and you pursued this thing. You mentioned something about the coats of arms, or the heraldry of the papacy. That, to me, is fascinating, and you've got that covered in Petrus Romanus. Tell us about that.
Well, certainly. A lot of those Latin phrases seem to say something about the coat of arms, and they call it heraldry. And you would think that might be something that would be easily to manipulate. And, my first thought was, well, maybe the Pope just picks his coat of arms to match the prophecy, in a way to get him elected Pope. And so I looked into that, using a critical methodology, and I've discovered that heraldry is an art and science in the Roman Catholic Church, and they actually have a lot of rules about how they go about it. When you become a cardinal, you are required to pick your coat of arms if you haven't already had one. A lot of them already have it from their family. But so it's a requirement. And when you become a cardinal, you're talking usually a period of between 30 and 40 years between the time someone is a cardinal and then gets elected Pope.
So let me stop you right there. Just because you get to be a cardinal certainly does not guarantee the papacy. There are many, many steps between becoming a cardinal and becoming a pope, and yet that fixed coat of arms occurs when you become a cardinal. Now, that's amazing, because this introduces what could be chance into the situation. It's a very chancy thing that a particular coat of arms will become pope, and yet the prophecy of the popes seems to link to those coats of arms.
It seems to accurately describe many of the Pope's coat of arms way ahead of time.
Wow. And folks, you can read all about this in Petrus Romanus. I guarantee you an amazing, amazing journey when you get into this book. There are so many signs today. People are talking about times and dates and places, and they're talking about calendars, and they're talking about solar and lunar eclipses and wars and rumors of wars and Middle East upheavals. And right in the middle of the whole thing, you have Petrus Romanus. Tom, this This is amazing, and the book is timely. I can't overemphasize that word, timely.
Yeah, in fact, that's part of what compelled us to write the book, because nobody else had written it. I mean, we were actually kind of amazed by the fact that just for historical reasons alone, you have a medieval prophecy 900 years old, and the very next pope, following Pope Benedict XVI, is the last one on this list. And the author of the prophecy tells us that two things will happen. One, he will be a pope or an anti-pope that will be under the control of Satan. He'll actually be the pope that will take the role of the false prophet, who will help give rise to the Antichrist. A lot of Catholics, by the way, don't know that it is a very common eschatology in their history that many of their leaders, many of their prophets, their famous apparitions, La Salette, Fatima, some of the most celebrated men that were members of the church, Cardinal Henry Manning, wrote and detailed how at the end of time, Rome would become apostate and would become the seat of the Antichrist. This was actually a common thought among intellectuals in Romanism, in Roman Catholicism. But taking the timing of this prophecy and looking at all of the other signatures around it, something, again, is very strange about the year 2012. One thing I'd want to add, Gary, first of all, we are not date setters, and I know you're not a date setter, but we're not setting dates. We're looking at why were so many other people pointing to the year 2012. And then we're looking at some things that may be beyond coincidence, in that around the world today, you could take Matthew 24, and I dare anybody to take any part of Matthew 24, whether it's talking about signs in nature, earthquakes, what's happening in the Middle East right now that looks like, what do we got, something like 19 countries with the United States right now that are staging major war games in the Middle East, but they've excluded Israel. I mean, there's prophetic signatures all over the world, and right in the middle of it, you have what looks to be the final prophecy from a Catholic mystic who pointed to the coming of the false prophet, and it looks to be playing out in the year 2012. You look at Rome right now, even the current Pope Benedict XVI has argued as a theologian that it would be okay for him to step down. He's getting feeble. They're wheeling him around on a cart everywhere he's going. The Vatican's own official voice piece, the El Osservatore Romano, their newspaper, had a feature article in it recently saying that the electors, the conclave, the College of Cardinals, are preparing for the conclave that is going to elect his successor, that they're already preparing for that now. So you see something that certainly could be fulfilled, and this imminently, which could be a major fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Can I say one final thing? Sure. And that is this. Not only are we not date setters, we also don't put on a par with the Bible any extra biblical prophecies. But we do recognize that it's good evangelical theology to accept that God sometimes chooses sources through which revelation comes that would not fit easy into our denominational boxes. For instance, when he chose a Nebuchadnezzar to give him one of the most central prophecies, you got this evil, narcissistic, pagan king, and then he even requires Daniel to interpret that fantastic revelation that is central to much of dispensational thinking today. You have Balaam, a sorcerer, who's hired by Balak, the Moabite king, to prophesy evil against Israel. And yet we know that his prophecy, I shall see a star, but not now, a scepter shall rise out of Judah, that this is probably the prophecy in Numbers that caused the Magi in the New Testament to follow the star and travel to the birth of the king, and this from a sorcerer. So sometimes God, I wish God would follow my rule book, but he doesn't always. And we were left wondering if what's transpiring rapidly around this book, and there's going to be a lot we can't get into just on this show, but there are things in this book people are never going to read anywhere else. We should talk about the codex from a French writer by the name of Renee Thibaut,
I'll tell you
a Jesuit.
And Tom, I'm just going to let you and Chris sort of have a discussion here about Renee Thibaut and his book. Let's start with Chris. How did you come across this book, and what's the basic thesis?
Well, Gary, I was, researching the prophecy, and There was a lot of Catholic scholars who were critical of it, that thought it might have been a forgery or some kind of a propaganda effort to get a particular papal candidate elected in the 16th century. But then I was also looking for sources that believed in the prophecy. And one modern Catholic scholar, his name's John Lupia, he's actually the editor of Roman Catholic News. He wrote 2 articles in support of the authenticity and the reliability of the prophecy. And he wholeheartedly believes it's a real prophecy. And one thing that he did was he listed a whole list of sources of bibliography, and I referred to his sources, and I found this book by a Belgian Jesuit academic named Renee Thibaut. Now, Renee Thibaut was a Jesuit. He taught at the university over there in Belgium, and he wrote a book called The Mysterious Prophecy of the Popes. Now, he also believed the prophecy, but he did detect that there was some tampering that went on with it, and he dated the authentic portion of the prophecy from 1572 forward. And so what he did in 1951, this is when this book was published. I had a copy of it that I had dug up from a university basement. In 1951, he extrapolated the average papal reign length as 11 years. So what he did is he added up all the popes, all the time from 1572 until his time in 1950, and divided that, and he got 11 years. Okay, so there were 40 popes after 1572 to the end of the list. And at the end of the list, it predicts the destruction of Rome and the judgment of God. So with 40 popes left in 11 years, that's 440 years. And if you add that to 1572, which is starting date, you land squarely in 2012. Now, this just blew me away.
Wow.
I mean, all the hype that we have in the media about the year 2012, and here I discover a book written in 1951, way before the Mayan calendar was popular, way before 2012 was on anybody's radar. This Jesuit predicted the final pope and the judgment of Rome from 6 different calculations. 2012. There you go.
Tom, this is mind-boggling.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And there's so much more. I mean, to me, I wanted to give credit where credit is due because Cris Putnam was the one that found this document. And the only reason why this book by Renee Thibaut had fallen into obscurity is because he published it in 1951, and he died literally a few months later. So the book just immediately went out of print. He died in 1952 in Egenhoven, and became lost to the world. But there's so much about what he found in the prophecy of the popes that makes it even more extraordinary, meaning that the 11-year, for instance, calculation of the average pope from 1572 forward to his day, 1950, would not have needed to remain true. In fact, mathematically, statistically, it shouldn't have remained true. His prediction should have fallen apart, falling.
You know what impressed me, if I can interrupt here, is the fact that some papal reigns are extremely short. Mm-hmm. Others are extremely long, and yet they all balance out to that 11-year average.
They did, from his day forward until the current year. In fact, part of that was because, like Pope John Paul I only lived as Pope 33 days and then died. There's conspiracy around that. Was he poisoned? Was it the Freemasons? Yeah. But the bottom line was, it literally required him to die after 33 days in order to keep this 11-year average reign of popes, leading all the way up to Pope Benedict XVI. And if Benedict XVI is replaced in 2012, he too would have fit into that model. But that's only the first thing. Cris could tell you about the fact that Thibaut also believed that the document was of Irish origin, which would, of course, fit with the idea that Malachi had written it. And the Irish loved doing anagrams. They loved hiding things in plain sight inside of words. Well, some of the stuff that he found in here, like the pope that became one of the popes known as Pius, it not only predicted what it was his heraldry would match, but hidden in the language is pious, pious. So twice, like Mayday, Mayday, he wanted us to be aware that hidden in that language was the actual name that this pope would take.
Well, what can I say except, folks, you've heard maybe this much. of what this book is about. And already you've got to be incredibly, as you're talking, I'm just sitting here and thinking, this is a 500-page book, and we've covered what? 25 pages?
Well, 25 pages maybe. The bottom line is it's over 500 pages.
Yeah.
There's 750 authoritative endnotes, images, graphs, because again, what fell into our lap is amazing that nobody else had found this, amazing that nobody else had wrote it. Well, one thing I would want to say is that when a person reads this book, they're going to come to a conclusion that Renee Thibaut did. After studying this, and keep in mind, he was a Jesuit, he was devoted to Catholicism, he was an academic, he was a code breaker, he was an anagram solver, he was a brilliant individual, and they'll see that in the book as he approaches this from solar activity. He approaches it from all these various improbable, including mathematical, highly complex mathematical formulae to show from all these various improbable situations that it pointed exclusively to the year 2012 for the final pope, and it looks very much like his calculations may in fact be accurate. And so you're going to leave this believing what he did. Something unusual is going on with this prophecy. Then we raise the question: was it divinely inspired? Was it demonically inspired? Or there's a third option. Have the cardinals been electing popes for one reason or another that they believe would match up somehow with this prophecy?
Wow.
Some of the more recent predictions have also fallen into place in a way that is pretty compelling. Like John Paul I, who was famous for one of the shortest papacies in history with only 33 days, his motto was "From the midst of the moon." And, it's quite interesting that he was born in a diocese named Belluno, which means beautiful moon. That's the kind of thing that, either they picked him on purpose based on where he was from, or the prophecy was predicting the future. I mean, because also his ascendancy to the papacy when he took office was right in the middle of a half moon in its waning phase, which is the sort of thing that lines up perfectly within the midst of the moon. The next pope, John Paul II, his prophecy is in Latin. The English translation would be "from the labor of the sun," and it's quite amazing that he was born during an eclipse, and then he was buried during an eclipse, and you can very easily see the labor of the sun predicted thousands of years ahead of time right there.
Wow, that's amazing. And Tom, we talked about the, if you will, the serendipity, the blessing, the way all these ideas came together to produce this book is a story in itself.
It is a story in itself. And something else, I've been on the show with you before when I wrote the book Apollyon Rising 2012.
Yeah, right.
And the reason the date 2012 was on there had to do with a lot of the ancient cultures, different people who looked forward into the future. Of course, there's been this whole New Age fascination with the end of the Mayan calendar. Yeah. Hey, by the way, I want to say I'm glad that this week in someplace in old Mexico that they found some more Mayan documents that say the world's not going to end in the year 2012, that was not a correct interpretation, because people that get the book Apollyon Rising from you will also read where I was saying this a few years ago. It's not what the prophecy says. It's not what the calendar says. And I'm sick of hearing that the Mayans said that the world's going to end in 2012. They didn't. What they did prophesy was the calendar would roll over and there would come the dawn of a new age. And that this new age, by the way, would be witnessed by the arrival of two great voices, two great men on earth. Sounds very much like the coming of the false prophet and the Antichrist, which corresponds very much with the prophecy of the popes. And so there was, down through time, we found out that even Jonathan Edwards, old preachers in the hands of an angry God, Jonathan Edwards,
right,
when, from a historicist point of view, looking forward into the future, speculating when the false prophet would arrive, the Antichrist, and when the papacy would be destroyed, and sets it in the years 2012 and 2016. How many of us evangelicals knew that Jonathan Edwards believed that? Since then, we've found out there's something like over a dozen more that lived during those years that also pointed to the years 2012 and 2016.
Well, when I read this, in fact, I was privileged to be able to read the manuscript before the book came to print. And as I read this, gentlemen, I was struck by one thing, that it's time for all this to be publicized. In other words, there seems to be a timeliness about this book. And we're not talking about the Mayan prophecies here. We're talking about the flow of history. And by the way, the flow of history as described in our Bible.
Yeah, exactly right. But the Maya, however, did set a date, 2012. Yes, and their prophets believe that it will be marked by the return of their flying dragon god. This sounds very prophetic too, doesn't it?
Indeed,
in the year 2012. The Aztec calendar ends in 2012 with the return of their flying dragon god. The Cherokee Indian calendar ends in 2012 with the return of their flying dragon god. The Hindu Kali Yuga calendar ends in the year 2012 at the end of the age of the male demon. That list goes on and on. There's other strange things. They just found a second stele of some kind in Mexico that is the second one talking about the rising up from the underworld of the Mayan god Bolan-Yactecu. This is the god that oversees the old bones and the seed of the old ones in the underworld with Quetzalcoatl. These are going to rise in the year 2012. When you read those cosmologies, it sounds very much like they're describing the book of Revelation.
Absolutely.
In which it says a time is going to come in which the beast is going to rise up out of the bottomless pit and enter into Apollyon, Apollo, the spirit that's identified in antiquity, and connected to the coming of Antichrist.
And by the way, this just really sets the stage for the rest of this book, because we talked about the lost book that wasn't really lost, and we talked about the Belgian gentleman, and we talked about a book by Renee Thibaut. And I want you to know that 500 plus pages here all fit together to make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. And you've had that experience, right?
Well, absolutely. We're talking about the historicist interpretation of the book of Revelation. I was in seminary in a church history sequence, and I wanted to look at the way classical Christian thinkers throughout history had interpreted the book of Revelation. And what I discovered is, if you look from the time of the Reformation forward, almost unanimously from the time of Luther through about 1900 or so, many of these fellows believed that the Pope was the Antichrist. And I mean, unequivocally, you could look at Spurgeon or even John Wesley, John Calvin, all of these great Christian commentators throughout history believed that. And they based the reign of Antichrist on their interpretation of when the Pope declared himself to be the universal bishop over the whole church. And a lot of them believed it was then. And then they also allowed for a time, about 150 years later, in 756 AD, when the Pope became a temporal power, when he began to have political control over land, when they got the papal states in Italy. Now, they did that based on a fraudulent document known as the Donation of Constantine, and they actually went to war and took over a big area of real estate. Now, when the Pope did that, a lot of commentators believe that they kind of made a Faustian bargain, if you will, where they kind of sold out to the powers of the world. So what they did is they interpreted the 1,260 days in the book of Revelation, chapter 12, as years, much like what we do with the 70 weeks of Daniel, the year-to-day correspondence. So they extrapolate 1,260 years from 756. Some start at 752, and that lands you right in the period of 2012 to 2016. Now, Jonathan Edwards was one of those who allowed for that. And so you have this conflation of Protestant interpretations for most of the 17th, 18th, 19th century, all predicting that this period of time that we're in now would be the fall of the Antichrist system, which they believed was Rome.
Now, it's interesting that in the 19th century, we saw the rise, following John Nelson Darby and the Plymouth Brethren and so forth, we saw the rise of dispensationalism. and I think a de-emphasis on the idea that the Pope was the Antichrist. In other words, we've shifted into a different way of interpreting the Bible right now, and yet here we find ourselves at the very moment when a lot of these ancient ideas seem to be congealing, coming together in a particular way.
Well, that's right, Gary. And I wrote a chapter in the book. It's called Historicism Back to the Future. And I actually kind of advocate a hybrid approach. I looked at, all these great Bible commentators over time thought that. Were they all wrong? And maybe there's room for elements of both to be true. And that's kind of the tack I take in the book. Because, obviously, there's a final Antichrist. John wrote in the book of 1 John, many antichrists have come, right? That was back in the first century. So, I think sometimes we see the Antichrist as one ultimate figure, but it's also been many figures over time. So there's room for both elements of these interpretations to sort of coincide and work together.
Well, now, you're not naming the Antichrist.
Absolutely not.
At all in this book.
No.
And in fact, that's not the preoccupation of the book. The preoccupation of the book is the fulfillment of an extremely well-documented prophecy, which coincides with other prophecies. Even the elders of Israel named the year 2012.
Yeah, they did. And let me say, too, we don't try to name who the Antichrist is. Right. We think this is bad practice among Christians to set dates and name people and do all of that.
I agree.
But it is more than just an excuse, though, to use the end of this medieval prophecy as an opportunity to talk about the future coming of the false prophet and the Antichrist. Especially what some Catholic listeners to your program may discover is that there are many Catholics, including modern-day Catholics, mystics, who are interpreting the next pope following Benedict, and they believe that he will be the false prophet, not the Antichrist, but the false prophet. He will be a religious figure who will help guide the allegiance of the world's religious communities into accepting this man of sin as a political savior, if you will. And when you think about Rome, this is one of the reasons why even many of their own writers down through time have agreed that, for instance, the Vatican City is Mystery Babylon. It is the city on 7 hills. Many of their own writers have admitted that. And we see the destruction of it, of course, in the book of Revelation.
Yeah.
But when you look at Rome as a city, and when you look at it as both a religious and political platform, what other religious identity is there on earth that has something like 120 countries that they have relationships with? They have 90-some ambassadors that are parked there in the Vatican City that do business. Who has those kind of diplomatic relations? I don't think the Baptists do. I don't, so the Vatican is set up in a way that is unique to be a fulfillment of this end times prophecy.
Lots of information. There's lots to talk about these days, Tom. Things are happening at an amazing pace. Where do you want to go next in the description of this book?
Well, one thing also that should be clarified is that the Pope following Pope Benedict does not have to have the Christian name Peter or even be known popularly as Peter the Roman in order to be a fulfillment of this prophecy for several reasons. First of all, because every pope is considered to be the latest Peter in the line. They're all considered to be sitting on the throne of Peter. So in that sense, they're all Peter. They're the next Peter. But all that would have to happen really is for an Italian to be voted in, to be known as Peter the Roman. Now, we do, however, go into the book. We talk about our top 10 candidates for the role of Peter the Roman.
Wow.
And this based on their papability, what is believed about them, the fact that they're turning up in the Vatican's own lists and Vatican watchers the list. There's a kind of a predictive process around this. Well, right at the top in our list is the current Secretary of State at the Vatican. He's the Pope's Carmelingo. His name happens to be Tarcisio Pietro Peter Bertoni, who was born in Romano. So if he winds up being the Pope, that's going to be a scary fact. But that doesn't have to happen, and there's numerous other ways in which that prophecy could be fulfilled. So we wanted people to be aware of that. Another one, Peter Turkson of Ghana, as a young pope, is considered to be very papable. He too could be Peter the Roman. So numerous ways in which that prophecy could be fulfilled, and we believe that it is unfolding now to occur in the year 2012.
Well, you know, Chris, as Tom was talking a moment ago, it really struck me that Roman Catholics believe these prophecies. That is to say, this is not a Gentile conspiracy, or or some concocted thing among church leaders to try to make the Pope look bad. This actually comes out of Vatican sources in many cases, and that's amazing to me.
Well, that's absolutely true. You know, you talked about there was a time in the 19th century when the interpretation of prophecy began to change, and people started to look more toward Israel and more toward the future as the fulfillment of these prophecies. And one of the original thinkers about that was a Jesuit from Chile, and his name was Manuel Lacunza. And he's given a lot of credit for one of the early people to see the reformation of Israel in the future, and that these prophecies would take place in the future. And he also saw the Roman Catholic Church as Mystery Babylon in the book of Revelation and the destruction of Rome. And he predicted that the church would grow more apostate, and that this judgment would fall on her, which coincides with the prophecy of the popes. It coincides with the book of Revelation. And, it fits well with dispensational thinking as well.
Well, and it's interesting that as you get into Revelation, you're talking about Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots. That vision of the woman and the beast seems to be focused in Europe right now. The European community has that as the symbol on their currency, the woman riding the beast and so forth and so on. And the woman is thought of as not only as Mystery Babylon, but the Babylonian mystery religion, which came to be focused in Rome. And a lot of writers have written about that over the last 150 years. So this is nothing really that new, but what you have done is document it in ways it has not been documented before.
That's true. And it all seems to be coming to a head in some surprising ways. As futurists and dispensationalists, we believe that, Israel is the focus of a lot of the Bible prophecies. Yes. And one thing that I uncovered in the research of this book, we're all kind of looking to see a third temple built in Israel, our reading of 2 Thessalonians and some of the prophecies in Revelation, we see the Antichrist entering the temple and proclaiming himself to be God. We believe that that's a future event. And, one thing that I found that is quite astounding is that, the Roman Catholic Church has always had designs on Jerusalem. And, you can look, that was the purpose of the Crusades. I mean, they were sending armies there to conquer Jerusalem for the Pope. And that never worked out. The Muslims were always able to hold them at bay. And now we have Israel back in their homeland. Yet I uncovered a lot of information about a conspiracy to give sovereignty of the whole holy city of Jerusalem to the papacy. And in fact, there's been several Israeli journalists. Barry Kamish is one of the big ones. Another one named Joel Bannerman, who uncovered a secret deal behind the Oslo Accords in 1993, where an unwritten part of it was a deal to give sovereignty of the holy city of Jerusalem to the Pope.
Wow. Well, as I listen to you guys, I'm listening to words like secret, forgotten, hidden, non-existent. Suddenly all this is popping back into existence, and you've got it all compiled here in one volume. That's the impressive thing to me, Tom.
Well, again, there was, I don't want to say there was something supernatural about the writing of the book, but there was something preternatural and timing Man, we got a fantastic introduction in this book written by one of my favorite Bible scholars. And his opening line is, timing is everything, right?
And it is.
And of course, we know that from the book of Daniel and other places in Scripture that there is something to the idea that knowledge will be concealed until a particular time, until the end times.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, knowledge would be made manifest and would accelerate. And we believe that this could potentially be part of that. When you look at all of the other occult signatures throughout society, what the Catholics themselves believed. Again, I'd want to reiterate, we did not write this book because we had some interest in attacking Catholics. That's not what the book is about.
Right.
The book is about prophecy, and it's why we spent so much time investigating what did the Catholics themselves believe. And of course, you have Catholics, even like Father Malachi Martin. He actually wrote a book called The Final Conclave, and he too believed that some of these early predictions from Cardinal Henry Manning and others, that this was actually going to happen, and he bemoaned the fact that the Vatican, where he had spent so much time, he was a confidant to 3 different popes. He worked for the Vatican translating the Dead Sea Scrolls. He was a formidable polyglot. He spoke, something like a dozen languages. Highly qualified guy, but he became somewhat disillusioned with what was going on in Rome, got special permission to move to New York and start writing books. And all his books he called fiction based on fact, and he was very clear, even to the point of saying that an enthronement of Lucifer, a ceremony, was actually conducted, and he wasn't the only one. There have been other Monsignors, other bishops that have said that at the highest level in Rome, there are priests. They're not true. They're not true priests in the sense that they're dedicated to their dogma. They're infiltrators, basically, Satanism. And this is not me making this up. They're saying this, that it happens, but was happening for a purpose. And it was all pointing towards a moment in time in which a pope would come to power who would be influenced by Satan and would help give rise to the Antichrist. That's among their prophecies, their most famous apparitions. And so we did the investigation to verify that they too saw this coming.
Tom, we've got a little over a minute, and I wish we had another hour.
Yeah, well, I was told a moment ago that this book already set the one-day sales record. We're hearing that all over the place. People are very interested in it. They don't understand it. They need to.
Absolutely, and it's an easy read. And by the way, Cris, blessings in your writing. You have the gift of putting complex ideas into clear writing, which I love. Not everybody can do that. It's quite readable.
Thank you very much, Gary. I just have to give all credit to the Lord who brought me in and saved me from a life of lostness, and it's just a pleasure to serve him.
Well, you've done a great job, and Tom, so have you, and always good to have you both. Again, what can I say? We are living in the time when things that have been concealed for centuries are popping right out into the open. All you have to do is just read the Bible, attempt to understand it, follow the leading of the Holy Spirit, and you're going to be amazed. I know I am every day working here. It's our privilege to deliver the word to you in the context of modern events. And that's why we always say, at the conclusion of this broadcast, I'm Gary Stearman. Keep looking up.
As a result of what's happening right now, we have put together a final Pope package. Again, Petrus Romanus by Tom Horn. The Rabbis, Donald Trump, the Third Temple. And this one by Tom has gathered a lot of conversation. It's called Exo Vaticana by Cris Putnam and Tom Horn. I hope you enjoy them.